Generally speaking, one person can manage to park a car correctly and safely rather well, but another may not succeed at it. Quite often, the drivers not only lack enough experience, but also do not understand how the car behaves when turning the wheel. In this tutorial film, we discuss the theory of parking, analyze common mistakes and ways to correct them. Special focus is given to safety. Here we proceed from the principle of forewarned is forearmed. This instructional material is based on the experience of 20 driving instructors, and it contains lots of useful information. The film consists of 3 chapters in which we consider the following. Chapter 1, the basics of maneuvering, that is, how the car behaves when moving forward and in reverse. Chapter 2, we consider parallel parking. Chapter 3, parking in a bay. The training material is based on 3D animations. Car models go and turn the same way as do real cars. 3D animation shows the process of parking from various perspectives and angles. This helps you to understand how the car is located in relation to the parking space. Animations are combined with video image from the passenger compartment of a car, so you can observe what is happening both outside and inside the car at the same time. In addition to animations, certain special symbols will appear on the screen in order to help you better navigate through the tutorial. These symbols are: the action as shown on the screen is the correct one. The action as shown on the screen is wrong. You are being asked a question and a given time to answer it. Attention! The information is of great importance. You are given a piece of advice. We wish you pleasant viewing, and do not forget to take notes. In this section, we talk about what your success will depend on in mastering the art of parking, give you some general tips, and learn how to do a 3-point turn. Many drivers cannot manage the process of parking because they are confused and do not know which way to turn the steering wheel. Therefore, on the screen, in front on the car, there will be shown an image of a steering wheel. The arrow indicates in which direction it should be turned: to the right, straight, or to the left. However, note a peculiarity. Let's rotate the steering wheel all the way to the right. Please note in what position the steering wheel has stopped. At first glance, it may seem that the wheel is turned, rather in the opposite direction, that is, to the left, and it may confuse you. To avoid this, remember this moment and be guided by the arrows. So let's look again. We shall turn the wheel to the left, put it in a straight ahead position, and now turn to the right. Now, let's count the number of revolutions that a steering wheel can make. Right now the wheel is turned all the way to the right. We shall rotate it in the opposite direction to the left as far as it will go. Let's count the revolutions. 1, 2, 3, 3.5. In order not to be confused, we will say that the wheel makes a total of 4 rounds, and we will remember that the last revolution is not complete. All cars are different, and in some cars, the steering wheel makes only 3 revolutions instead of 4. Whenever we talk about parking, it makes no difference how many rotations the steering wheel makes. Hereafter, we will consider an option where the wheel makes 4 revolutions. Your success in mastering the art of parking will depend largely on 2 factors: how fast you are traveling and how fast you turn the steering wheel. In an ideal scenario, the car moves slowly and the wheel turns quickly. In that case, the car requires minimum space to maneuver and it turns at a wider angle. As a result, you will be able to park even in a narrow parking space. However, some drivers do quite the opposite. It is a common mistake. Let us imagine that we are going fast, but we are turning the wheel slowly. As a result, our car manages to go far, but turns little. This driving style is absolutely not suitable for parking. The parking space is too small for such maneuvers. Let's see how this works in practice. We need to park in this parking space in a reverse motion. The driver of this car is making a mistake, which we have just discussed. His car is moving too fast, while he is turning the wheel slowly. As a result, the car cannot make such a sharp turn, and the parking fails on the first try. Let's see how to do it right. The driver of this car, in contrast, is moving slowly while turning the steering wheel rather quickly. To maneuver, the vehicle requires a minimum space, and the driver parks the car on the first try. In the process of parking, you often have to turn the wheel as far as it will go in one direction or the other, especially if you are entering a narrow parking spot where there is little free space. Sometimes beginners are lazy and do not want to turn the wheel all the way. Let's see why this is wrong. The car is in a wrong position and we need to put it parallel to the curb. The driver starts to move, turns the steering wheel in the right direction, but makes only 2 1/2 rotations, and then he stops turning the steering wheel for some unknown reason. Remember that to put the steering wheel straight, you need to make 2 revolutions. In our case, the driver has made 2 1/2 rotations of the steering wheel, and, note the location of the wheels, our car is going almost straight ahead. Let's see how much space we need to align the vehicle with the curb. So that is the result. Now let's return the vehicle to its original position, but this time we turn the steering wheel to the right until it stops. We make 4 revolutions, and the result is that we needed 2 times less space. In real life, some other car would be parked in front of yours, and room for maneuvering would be limited. That's why it is right to rotate the steering wheel as far as it goes. Question: let's look at this driver. He is trying to parallel park, but is having trouble doing it. He continues to make the same mistake, which is typical of many young and inexperienced drivers. What do you think is wrong? Pay special attention to the trajectory along which the car is moving. This driver's mistake is that he is not turning the steering wheel. He goes back and forth, but the trajectory of his car does not change. This could go on forever, but the driver still won't be able to drive deeper into the space. If you really want to steer a car, do not forget turning the steering wheel. Try to avoid this annoying mistake. Next, we discuss an exercise that you might meet on the driving test. It's called a three-point turn. We need to make a U-turn on a relatively narrow street with 3 maneuvers. This exercise is performed on an empty road where we are not getting in the way of other people. The principle of this exercise is very simple. In order not to go back and forth along the same trajectory, it is necessary to turn the wheel every time you start to move in the opposite direction. For example, I go forward and the steering wheel is turned to the left. Then I start to move in reverse. If I don't want to return to the same point where I was, I need to turn the steering wheel. Now I'm going in reverse and the steering wheel is turned to the right. Then I go in the opposite direction, forward, and so I have to turn the steering wheel, and so on. Every time that I change direction of motion, I need to turn the steering wheel. The main thing is not to repeat the mistake of the driver you just saw. The same principle can be used in different situations. For example, if you are unable to drive into a parking space on the first try, you have to change the direction of movement. You are going in reverse and now you go forward, so you have to turn the steering wheel. Now, when you have moved forward for a sufficient distance and start moving backwards, then and there you should be turning the steering wheel. So let's go back to the three-point turn. Let's start with the initial position. The street is narrow, and we have to use the available space to the maximum and move closer to the curb. First, we need to turn the steering wheel all the way to the left and drive ahead as far as possible. Then we have to turn the steering wheel all the way to the right and move in reverse as far as possible. Next, you turn the steering wheel to the left again and finish the maneuver. In carrying out this exercise, it is important to choose the adequate starting position. If you stopped initially far away from the curb, you will need 4 or 5 maneuvers to make a turn. Among other issues, do not forget, first of all, that we are moving slowly, and secondly, we turn the steering wheel every time as far as it goes. Otherwise, we cannot manage the turn in 3 maneuvers. Now let us talk about safety during the exercise. One of the evaluation criteria of the driving test is the ability to look around and assess the situation correctly. Stop on the right side of the road near the curb and have a look around before starting the first maneuver. Make sure that neither in the front nor the back is anyone who may be blocked by your actions, including pedestrians. Before making the next maneuver, look around carefully and make sure that the road is empty and open all around. Do not forget to make sure that there is no oncoming traffic, not only from the front, but also from the back. By itself, the three-point turn is a relatively simple exercise, but you have to be careful and sense the external dimensions of your car. Although you can understand the exercise in theory, you can learn to feel your car only in practice. Before we get to the main part of our course, we need to discuss what to avoid when parking. Do not turn the steering wheel while the vehicle is standing still. It is called dry steering. You need to start moving, and only then you can turn the steering wheel. Why is it so? The fact is that the surface of the road is very rough and works as a rasp file. So if you turn the steering wheel while you are at a stop, your tires get damaged and their service life is markedly reduced. If you turn the steering wheel while in motion, the wear on the tires is less and more even. Do not put the car in reverse gear when the car is moving. First, you need to stop completely and only then put it in reverse. Without going into details, let us say that the reverse gear is the only gear that you should not shift into while the car is moving. Otherwise, you can damage the gearbox. We'll show you what happens if you put the car in reverse gear while in motion. Do you hear that sound? Do not repeat this on your car. In this section, we talk about how the car behaves when moving forward and what should be considered when maneuvering. Imagine a bicycle. It has two wheels, front and rear. When you turn the handlebar, only the front wheel turns. The rear wheel does not. As a result, when you turn, each wheel travels along its own trajectory. The front wheel turns, and the rear one cuts the corner. A car makes a turn according to the same principle as a bicycle. A car also has front and back axles. The only difference is that a car has a pair of wheels on each axle and not one, like a bicycle. By turning the steering wheel, the driver turns only the front wheels. The wheels on the back axle don't change their angle of direction. During the motion, the front wheels turn and go around the cone. The back wheels have their own trajectory. They pass much closer to the cone, cutting a corner. This feature should be taken into account when maneuvering. If the driver turns the steering wheel too early, the front part of the vehicle goes around the obstacle smoothly, but the back wheel of the vehicle touches it. This brings up the question, at what moment do you have to turn the steering wheel? Here it is convenient to be guided by your own shoulder. The driver sits approximately in the center of the car, and it can be said that his shoulder represents the middle of a car. The steering wheel should be turned when the shoulder is approximately opposite the cone. That is, when half of the car has already passed the obstacle. In that case, the back end of the vehicle will travel at a safe distance from the obstacle. At the same time, configuration and position of the driver's seat does not play a big role. Indeed, someone may be sitting a little farther from the steering wheel, someone closer, but the shoulder is still a reliable guide. Look how much space is left to the cone. Even if you sit very close to the steering wheel, the shoulder works as a reference point. Regardless of how much confidence you have in your reference guiding points, you need to keep the situation under control in any case and to monitor the distance to the obstacle. This is done through the side mirror. The most dangerous moment is when the cone is right opposite to the back wheel and the distance to the cone is minimal. Therefore, look at the side mirror for as long as the back wheel passes the obstacle and the danger is over. Let's see how we can apply this in practice. We need to drive the car out of the parking space to the right and to avoid scraping the car next to it. The driver moves in a forward direction until his shoulder passes the car parked nearby. After that, he turns the steering wheel and monitors the back end of his car through the side mirror. The car should move slowly, otherwise it is very difficult to control the situation. It is rather convenient to use your shoulder as a guideline, but the lateral distance from the cone plays here an important role. In order to drive around an obstacle safely, the lateral distance to the obstacle must be a minimum of 2 feet. A question. Now the distance to the cone is 2 times less than it should be, that is, about 1 foot. What do you think will happen if you turn the steering wheel when your shoulder is in front of the cone? With such lateral space, the back end of the car is going to hit the cone in any case. In order not to touch it, you have to turn the steering wheel later than usual, more or less at this moment. Thus we come to the conclusion that the farther away the object is from you, the easier it is to come around it. This principle is often used by experienced drivers. When they drive out of the parking space, they turn away from a nearby car at first, and only then go around it. Now let's talk about what to do if you made a mistake, having turned the steering wheel sooner than necessary. In the side mirror, you can see that the distance to a nearby car drops to a dangerous level. In such a situation, it is necessary to turn the steering wheel to the straight forward position. Then the lateral interval stops to decrease and remains unchanged. Now you can go straight ahead, and when the car has almost completely left the parking box, you can turn the steering wheel back toward the exit. At the same time, we need to constantly monitor the lateral distance through the side mirror. So once again, if the lateral interval becomes dangerously close, you need to put the steering wheel in the straight position and then turn it to the right again. In this part, we talk about how to drive and maneuver in reverse, what reference points are used in these circumstances, and we examine the exercise called reversing around a corner. Many drivers have problems when driving in reverse. They're often confused and do not know which way to turn the steering wheel. In fact, everything is quite easy. If you're driving forward and want to turn left, you turn the steering wheel to the left. That is logical. If you want to go to the left while moving in reverse, you should turn the steering wheel to the left also, and the car obediently goes to the left. There's no difference whether you're going forward or backward. You need to turn the steering wheel in the direction you want to go. An example. You have stopped too far from the curb, but you want to park closer to it. You want your car to move more to the left side, so you turn the steering wheel to the left. Now you need to drive a short distance to move the car closer to the curb. And then, in order to align the car, we have to turn the steering wheel in the opposite direction, to the right. When the vehicle is located parallel to the curb, we have to turn the steering wheel in the straight position. This is the trajectory of our car. First we had shifted to the right, and then we have aligned the car. The example we have just discussed is, in a sense, similar to parallel parking. The idea is to move the car closer to the curb. When you turn the steering wheel, you direct only the front wheels on the front axle. When the car goes forward, this axle is at the front and the car behaves in the usual way. But when you're moving backwards, this axle becomes the back one. For this reason, when you go backwards, the car responds to the turn of the steering wheel in a different way. See how the car behaves when we make a turn while moving backwards in reverse gear. The driver has turned the steering wheel to the right. Accordingly, the car turns right. But at the same time, its front part moves in the opposite direction, to the left. This happens because the turning wheels in this case are in the back. Pay attention to the trajectory of the car. The dashed lines show the corridor which the car takes when going straight forward. We turned to where we wanted, to the right, but the front part of the car went in the opposite direction. This point should always be considered when maneuvering in reverse gear. Whenever making a turn, you should leave at least 3 to 4 feet of free space for the front part of the car. Now the driver has turned the steering wheel to the left. The back end of the car turns to the left also, but its front end is shifting to the right. Let's sum this up. While driving in reverse, the steering wheel should be turned precisely in the direction you want to go. However, keep in mind that the front part of your car will move in the opposite direction. Therefore, at least 3 to 4 feet of free space should be left sidewise. A question. You need to drive out of the parking space in reverse gear. There's another car on your right, and on the left the space is empty. The space behind you is limited. Which way is it easier to go, to the right or to the left? It is easier to go to the right, as in that case the front of the car will shift to the left, exactly where a lot of free space exists. Driving to the left should have been difficult because the front end of the car would have gone right where the space is limited by the neighboring car. Next question. Your car is standing at an angle with the curb and you want to park it parallel to the sidewalk. To do this, you have to move backwards. Which way do you need to turn the steering wheel in order to move the front end of the car to the right and to align the car? To the left. When you turn the steering wheel while reversing, the car's front end will always be shifted in the opposite direction. If we turn the wheel left, the car's front end will move to the right and it will end up parallel to the curb. As we already know, the car behaves differently when you make a turn moving forward and moving in reverse. When the driver goes round the obstacle in a forward motion, he uses his shoulder as a guide. That is, he turns the steering wheel after his shoulder passes the obstacle. When the driver moves backwards in reverse gear, the reference point is no longer the shoulder, but the back wheel. If it is opposite the obstacle, you can safely turn the steering wheel all the way. The car under no circumstances will hit the obstacle. Let us watch how that happens. The driver has turned the steering wheel to the right. Now the back end of the car does not touch the cone anymore, and the front part keeps moving away from it. If you turn the steering wheel at the right moment, when the wheel is in front of the cone, the car goes successfully around it. But if you turn the steering wheel too early, the back wheel hits the cone. It is interesting to note that the wheel can be very close to the obstacle, but if you turn the steering wheel at the right moment, it will not touch it. It is quite easy to understand when the back wheel is opposite to the obstacle. Just look over the shoulder. Most cars have a small window on the back door, and it usually has a triangular shape. If the cone is on your right, you look over your right shoulder to the triangular window of the back door. When the cone appears in that window, it means the car's wheel is in front of it. Now you can safely turn the steering wheel. If the cone is on the left, then look over your left shoulder. When you see the obstacle in the center of the back window, you can turn the steering wheel. The rear wheel is in front of the obstacle. Your car can be long or short. It may or may not have the trunk, but on all the vehicles, the back wheels are located according to the same principle, and these reference points are working in any case. Thus, the reference point for the right side is the triangular window on the right, and for the left side, the center of the back window. The question arises as to why the left and right reference points are different. The fact is that the driver sits not in the middle of the car, but on one side. Therefore, he looks at the obstacles from different angles and sees the moment when the wheel is near the obstacles in different ways. The position of the driver and the location of the driver's seat do not play a significant role here. Now we examine the exercise called reversing around a corner. Here you need to drive around the corner while moving backwards in a reverse gear, while staying in your lane. In other words, you do not go into the oncoming traffic lane. Let's start with an initial position. You pass through the intersection and stop at a distance measuring about the length of 2 cars from it. It should be approximately 2 feet from the curb on the right side. Before starting the movement, lower the right side mirror slightly downward in order to see better the distance between your car and the curb. The essence of the exercise lies in the fact that the driver must keep a constant distance between the vehicle and the curb. In this case, the car moves along the optimal trajectory and does not end up on the wrong side of the road. It is possible to keep the needed distance by using the side mirror. Since the mirror is directed downward, you will be able to see the knob of the front door. Your task is to keep a constant distance from this knob to the curb. Let us examine this exercise from start to finish. The driver starts to move and continues in a straight line. He looks in the side mirror and turns the steering wheel just enough to avoid changing the distance from the front door to the curbstone. If you do everything right, the car will turn around the corner and still be parallel to the curb. When you see that the steering wheel is already in the straightforward position and the car is moving parallel to the curb, stop. The exercise is complete. In technical terms, It is quite easy to turn around the corner in reverse gear, but this exercise requires a lot of training. Move at a low speed, which allows you to adjust the trajectory of the vehicle if necessary. Do you remember the principle? The steering wheel should be turned in the direction in which you want to go. Thus, if you need to come closer to the curb, turn the steering wheel in its direction. If on the contrary, you want to drive away from the curb, turn the steering wheel slightly in the opposite direction from the curb. Having to give way to others on the road when traveling in reverse gear adds to the complexity of this exercise. Do not forget to look around and to signal turns. You can prepare for reversing around a corner in advance. When you pass the intersection, look to the right for clearance. As we already know, the front end of the car gets shifted when making a turn in reverse. Thus, your vehicle occupies more space on the road and obstructs traffic. So before you start reversing, you should look around and make sure there is no traffic. In the course of the exercise, you need to constantly monitor the space around your vehicle. Remember that when traveling in reverse, you must give way to everybody on the road, including the pedestrians. In this chapter, we discuss parallel parking. We look at parallel parking techniques, discuss what to do if the car is parked wrong, and we consider most common mistakes. You need to park between two cars that are situated parallel to the edge of the road. This is called parallel parking. In order to drive into such a spot easily, its length must be at least 1.5 times your car's body length. The space can be either at the right or the left side of the road. It is important to correctly position the vehicle within the parking place. You have to stay in the center of the spot, that is, midway between the two cars, and the distance from the wheels to the curb must be optimal. What does that mean? The fact is that the closer you put your car to the curb, the less it will interfere with traffic. But avoid getting up against the curb. You can scratch the disc or damage the tires. In addition, you won't be able to turn the front wheel to a larger angle. It will just stop against the curb. And it can be said that optimal distance away from the curb is 4 to 6 inches. As a rule, parallel parking is performed in reverse. Why is this so? The fact is that the front end of the car is very maneuverable due to the turning wheels being situated there, and the car's front end can be easily shifted left or right. The back wheels of the car do not turn, and therefore, controlling the back end of the car is much more complicated. The main point of any parking method is, first you have to set the back end of the car in the right direction, and only then pull the car's front end there. In case of parallel parking, we first set the back end of the car to the curb, and only then we pull the front part there. If you stick to this principle, you can easily park in a standard-sized parking space. In order to parallel park in forward motion, you need a parking space 2 times larger than usual. Let's talk about the technique for parallel parking. The secret of successful parking lies in the starting position of the car. 50% of your success depends on it. If your car is positioned correctly before parking maneuvers, you will be able to drive even into a narrow and at first glance inconvenient parking space. But if the initial position is incorrect, the process of parking will be much harder. Let's consider parallel parking situated on the right side of the road. The starting position is as follows. You pass by a parking space and stop parallel to the car parked in front of it. The lateral distance should be between 2 and 3 feet, and the steering wheel must be in a straight forward position. There is no point in driving too far forward, but stop when your car is next to the car parked in the front of the parking space. From such a position, it is the easiest way to park. Now, direct the right side mirror downward. You will use it to guide you in parking the car parallel to the curb. To drive into the parking place, you need to turn the steering wheel 3 times. Hence we divided the parallel parking into 3 steps. First you need to turn the steering wheel all the way to the right, then put it into the straight forward position, and finally turn the steering wheel all the way to the left. Please note that we never turn the steering wheel 2 times in the same direction. So once again, right, straight, and left. Remember that you need to move slowly and to turn the steering wheel quickly. Now let us examine the steps of parallel parking one after another. The first step. The car is in its starting position. The driver looks over his shoulder through the triangular window of the back door and drives backwards in a straight line. When the back end of the car on its right appears in that window, he turns the wheel to the right. Our car starts to back into the space. The second step. The driver looks into the left side mirror. When the right-hand corner of the car parked behind you appears in it, the driver puts the steering wheel into the straight forward position. The car moves in a straight line. Now we have given direction to the car and its back end approaches the curb. The third step. The driver looks at the right side mirror. When it covers the tail light of the car in front, the driver turns the steering wheel to the left. Now our car is inside the parking space, and we only need to put it parallel to the curb. For this purpose, it is convenient to use the side mirror, which we had directed downwards in advance. And then drive to the middle of the parking space. Now, let's examine the parallel parking technique in greater detail, and more importantly, talk about why we have made this or that maneuver. Let's start from the beginning. Step 1. We need to pass safely the car in front and direct our car into the parking space. How is it done? The driver turns the steering wheel when the back wheel of his car has reached the back end of the vehicle next to him. The driver knows that moment with the help of the triangular window on the back door. If you turn the steering wheel when the back wheel is in the correct turning point, you will never bump into a nearby car and will go around it safely. So we managed to steer our car into the space. Step 2. Now we need to move the car along a diagonal of the parking space and bring it closer to the curb. When we see in the left side mirror the right-hand corner of the car parked behind, we turn the steering wheel to the straightforward position. Now we have our car at an optimal angle in reference to the curb, and from this position it is easier for us to finish the parking process. Step 3. When the right side mirror covers the taillight of the car in front, it means that the back end of our car is near enough to the curb, and it's time to pull there the front end of our vehicle. Now we have enough free space in front of us, and if you turn the steering wheel to the left, the front end of our car will squeeze to the curb, and the car will stand parallel to the edge of the road. Once you are parallel to the curb, immediately put the steering wheel into a straightforward position. If necessary, you can now move forward or backward, putting your car in the middle of the parking space while not losing parallelism. At each step, try to repeat exactly the actions shown here. Why? As an example, let's consider a mistake on the second step. If you're late in turning the steering wheel, or if you turn it too slowly, your car will be moving towards the curb at too great an angle, resulting in the back wheel touching the curb, and you won't have time to align the car with the curb. In such a situation, it is simpler if you drive out of the parking space and try to park again than to maneuver within it, for you have too little space in the front and you cannot use the space behind because it is limited by the curb. Such errors occur due to carelessness or unwillingness to act. In order to avoid making mistakes, think through the actions in advance. Here you should always be guided by the principle of first think and then do. Remember that when parallel parking, we do not turn the steering wheel twice in the same direction. Usually mistakes occur during the last step when people somehow turn the wheel once again to the right. As a result, the car is trying to position itself at the straight angle to the curb. It is worth mentioning that the driver is not a robot, so he cannot drive into a parking space with the same accuracy every time. Besides, he orientates himself by other cars. Thus, a great deal of his success depends on the width of the other cars or how they are parked. So if something does not work, try to analyze why that is so. For example, let's see what determines the distance at which your vehicle is stopped by the curb. We divided parallel parking into 3 steps. The first 2 do not play a big role here. It all depends on the third step, that is, the point at which you turn the steering wheel to the left. If you turn the steering wheel at the right moment, the car will be stationed in an acceptable manner. A question: what do you think will happen if the driver turns the steering wheel for some reason later than necessary? If the driver turns the steering wheel too late, he won't have enough time to align the vehicle with the curb. The back wheel will hit the curb, and the car will remain standing at an angle. So, when parallel parking, the most important consideration is at what point you turn the steering wheel to the left at the third step. If you do everything right, you will park at the optimal distance to the curb. If you drive too deeply into the parking space, you will hit the curb with your back wheel. On the contrary, if you turn the steering wheel too early, you will end up far away from the curb. Let us consider the later scenario in detail, because it is the most unpleasant one for the driver. So, we were too hasty and turned the steering wheel to the left too early. As a result, the car is at a great distance from the curb. It is difficult to correct the situation, as it is necessary to move forward and backward a few times, trying to drive the car closer and closer to the edge of the road. How can we do this easier? If you try to approach closer to the curb while moving forward, it is likely that you will hit it at once with your front wheel. Let us remember that the car turns better when reversing, and therefore, we can maneuver better when moving in reverse gear. For a start, let us check how much space remains in the back. In this case, there's little room for maneuver, and therefore it makes sense to drive forward as far as possible. The best thing is to start maneuvering when the car is standing parallel to the edge of the road. We want to shift to the right, so we will turn the steering wheel to the right. We drive backwards in order to get the back end of our car to move closer to the curb. Now we turn to the left in order to squeeze the front part of the car to the curb. Thus we have approached the curb at the optimal distance. In fact, the vacant space behind the car is divided mentally into two equal parts. In the first part, the steering wheel is turned to the right, and in the second, to the left. In some cases, this procedure should be repeated several times. Note that at the rear, you have about 5 to 6 feet of space. Use this free space to the maximum. If you turn the steering wheel and drive only 5 to 10 inches, the position of the car is practically unchanged, and you would have to repeat this maneuver many times. Maneuvering within the parking space. Let's discuss maneuvering within the parking space and how to put the car parallel to the curb. First of all, please bear in mind that it is much easier to move the front end of the car to the left or to the right, while the back of the car is almost not moving. If you have stopped at some angle to the curb, your first thought should be in which direction to move the front of the vehicle in order to make it parallel with the edge of the road. The second thought should consider whether to do it by moving forward or backward, and then ask yourself in what direction you need to turn the steering wheel. Only after these considerations, then begin to act. If you mindlessly keep driving back and forth within the parking space, you probably will end up being only confused. A question. So you have driven into the parking space and started to align the car with the curb, but you don't leave enough room in the back. The car is not parallel with the curb. How do we fix this situation? We can put the car in parallel as follows. Shift the car's front end to the right. This can be done by turning the steering wheel to the right and driving forward. At the same time, we should not forget that there is very little space within the parking spot. So we move slowly, but we turn the steering wheel quickly, as far as it will go. The next question. How to position the car parallel with the edge of the road. To do that, you need to move the car's front end to the left. Because you don't have any space in the front, you need to move in reverse. In order to shift the car's front end to the left while the car is moving backwards, you need to turn the steering wheel to the right. While parallel parking, not only the back wheel but also the front wheel can rest against the curb. The fact is that when the driver turns the steering wheel, the wheel of the car goes out beyond the wheel arc. If you want to continue moving in the same direction, turn the wheel one turn back. Then the steering angle of the car wheel changes and you'll be able to go for some distance until the car ends up parallel with the curb. If the parking space is short, you would need to sense the outer dimensions of your car well. Here, a driving instructor or a more experienced driver can help you. At first, do not hesitate to get out of the car and check the distance to the neighboring car for yourself. Usually, from inside the car, it seems that there is no space at all, but in reality, it is not necessarily so. Driving out of the parking space. Before you leave the parking space, you must again adjust the side mirror. You'll need to use it later. In order to drive out of the space, you need to do two things: to engage in reverse gear and to turn the wheel in the direction of the curb. Parallel parking may be done either from the right or the left side. This rule works at all times. In our case, the curb is on the right, so the driver turns the steering wheel to the right. The car slides back and the front end shifts to the street. Now it is quite easy to leave the parking spot. Continue moving straight ahead, and when your shoulder passes the corner of the car parked in front, turn the steering wheel in the direction of the exit. Before you take advantage of our rule, look at the distance between the wheels and the curb. If it is minimal, it does not make sense to turn the steering wheel to the curb. The back wheel would hit the curb at once, and it would be impossible to move backwards. If the distance to the curb is too small, we have to go back in a straight line and then carefully leave the parking space from there. A question: is it a good idea to park the yellow car in this parking space? No, it is not, because it is possible to drive out of a parking space by going only forward. If you park there, you close the exit for the gray car. It cannot leave the space by moving backwards. Let's talk about parallel parking on the left side of the road. In your driving experience, you will run into situations where you have to parallel park not on the right side, but on the left side. For example, on a one-way street. In order to drive into the space situated on the left, you need to do the same thing as when parking on the right, but like a mirror image. The only difference is that at the very beginning, you need to turn the steering wheel when the back of the car next to you appears in the middle of the back window. Rather than appearing in the triangular window, as it is in the case of parking on the right side. The difference is explained by the fact that the driver is not sitting in the center of the car, but on its side. Hence, the reference points for him from the right side and left side are different. So let's take the starting position and examine all stages of the parking process in order. Step 1. Look over your left shoulder to the middle of the back window and move in a straight line. When you see there the back end of the car next to you, turn the steering wheel in the direction of the entrance, that is, to the left. Step 2. Look at the mirror on the right side. When the left corner of the car parked behind you appears in it, put the steering wheel in the straight forward position and move in a straight line. Step 3. When the mirror on the left side covers the taillight of the car parked in front, turn the wheel to the right and line the car with the edge of the road. As soon as the car is parallel to the curb, put the steering wheel in the straight forward position. Then you can drive forward to the center of the parking space and remain parallel to the road. This time you are sitting on the curb side. You can open the door and make sure that your car is parked correctly. When driving out of the parking space, you need to turn the steering wheel towards the curb. This time it is on the left. So we turn the wheel to the left and drive out of the space. Let us examine one more method of parallel parking. In many countries, you meet the following exercise in the driving test. There is a car parked at the edge of the road. You have to imagine that another car is parked behind it, and you have to park between the real car and the imaginary one. In this case, you should end up parallel parking at a distance not exceeding 2 lengths of your car from the car parked in front. It is possible to say that this exercise is a simplified version of classic parallel parking, because the length of the parking space is a little more than standard, and the space behind is limited not by a real, but an imaginary car. This exercise is similar to parallel parking, except that on the second step we look not to the left, but, attention, to the right mirror, the one situated on the side of the curb. We use the curb as our reference point. Looking ahead, we can say that this method is useful in parking into the non-standard size spaces. For example, when the space is too long and where the usual reference point used on the second step is not there affecting the algorithm of parking. Thus, steps 1 and 3 of parallel parking remain the same. The changes affect only the second step. Let us remember that the essence of this step lies in the fact that you need to correctly direct the vehicle in relation to the curb. In other words, set a correct angle of approximation to the curb. On the second step, we must put the steering wheel in the straight forward position. This is done at the moment you start to see the curb in the middle of your right side mirror. In this case, you direct the car to the curb at a right angle. But do not forget that before we started the parking process, we directed this mirror downwards, because at the normal setting, this guiding feature will not work. Let's see once more the whole process from beginning to end. You take the starting position, start to move and turn the steering wheel to the right when you see the back end of the adjacent car and the small triangular window. When you begin to see the curb in the middle of your right side mirror, put the steering wheel in the straight forward position. When the side mirror covers the corner of the front car, you turn the steering wheel to the left. And then you put your car parallel to the curb and finish the parking maneuver. At the same time, do not forget to assess each of your attempts. If the car's back wheel rests against the curb, then during the last step, try to turn the steering wheel a little bit earlier. As mentioned earlier, this technique can also be used for parallel parking. But when doing so, do not forget that a real car is situated behind you. It is worth checking from time to time how much free space you have behind the car. Safety during parallel parking. For many drivers, the complexity of parallel parking lies not only in terms of technique, but also in terms of safety. There are several points concerning safety that must be taken into consideration. Here are some of them. When you are approaching a parking space, you should signal toward it with your turn signal well in advance so that other drivers can understand your intentions and, if necessary, go around you. On the first step of parking, you turn the steering wheel to the right. Thus, the front end of your car shifts towards the center of the road. If at that moment someone is going past you, you can cause an accident. So first of all, wait until the road is completely free and only then start to move. Before you turn the steering wheel to the right, take another close look around. When at the third step of parking, you turn the wheel to the left, the front part of your car starts to move toward the car parked in front of you. Make sure enough free space is there. When you align the car with the curb, make sure your back wheel does not slam into it and that you have enough free space behind you. This is done with the help of rear view mirrors. However, sometimes it is difficult to determine the distance to the obstacle sitting in the car. For some drivers, it is easier to look over their shoulder, but in some cases, it is even better to get out of the car and see for yourself how much space you have in the back. If in doubt, play it safe. When driving out of the parking space, do not forget that another car is parked behind you. Make sure that the road is clear both in the front and in the back. In this chapter, we'll discuss parking in a bay, both in reverse and in forward gear, and give some helpful advice. So you're going to park in between two cars, placed at right angles to the roadway. This method of parking is called parking in the bay. The car must be located inside the parking space in the middle of it, and parallel to the other cars. Moreover, no part of your car can step outside the space. Now the car is parked properly. Please note that neither the front nor the back ends of the car are beyond the parking space boundaries. You can perform parking in the bay both in front and reverse gears. It all depends on where the parking space is situated. If it is far from you, it is more convenient to park in forward gear. And if it is close, in reverse gear. We'll start with a discussion of parking in a bay in reverse gear. There are many ways that this can be done. We will show you only two of them, the ones that we think are the most simple. The first and the easiest way assumes that parking spaces are marked with lines. We shall use one of these lines as a guide. The considered technique works when you reverse into the parking space either from the right or from the left. We shall discuss parking from the right side. You want to park between two cars. To make it easier to distinguish the parking places, let's mark some of them with letters A, B, and C. So we are going to park on the spot A. We start as usual with the initial position before parking. The driver passes over parking space C and stops. Lateral interval to the car parked at the spot B must be at least 3 to 4 feet. But the farther away you are, the easier it will be to park. In this case, you must also have at least 3 to 4 feet of free space on the left side, because when you start reversing, the front part of your car shifts to the left side. When parking in a bay, we take the last line of parking space C as a reference point. The driver starts to move and drives in a straight line. When he sees this line in the middle of his front window, he turns the steering wheel as far as it goes in the direction of the parking space. If you do it correctly and at the right moment, your car will turn to the center of the parking space A. Once you end up parallel to the lines, turn the steering wheel in the straightforward position. Then you just drive deeper into the parking space and stop. Parking in a bay is considered easier than parallel parking, but there are certain nuances that need to be taken into account. Let's discuss the last stage of the parking process, that is, when you're going to align your car with the marking lines. Let's see how to do it the easiest way. Parking spaces across from your parking space are in the same line with the ones on your side. You can align your car with the lines by using, for reference, the lines across from you. If there are no lines marked across from you, you can align your car with the marking lines using side mirrors. Direct your side mirrors downward so you can see the lines in order to align your car with them. By positioning your car properly, that is, parallel to the marked lines, you will complete parking without any problem. But if for some reason you fail to do this, the car will end up in the corner of a parking space. Even a slight deviation from the correct trajectory can lead to that result. Hence, the seemingly simple point of parallelism should be treated with care. A question: how to fix this situation? The problem is that the back end of the vehicle is not located in the center of the parking space. If you immediately turn the steering wheel to the left, the car ends up being parallel with the marking lines, but on the edge of the parking space. The best thing to do would be to turn the steering wheel slightly to the right and to drive forward until the back end of the car is in the center of the parking space. Then finish the parking process by driving in reverse gear. During the training course, you cannot be expected to park right in the middle of a parking space each time. It is not possible to repeat the same movement with 100% accuracy. If you see that the car is not in the center, but at the edge of the parking space, think first which way to turn the steering wheel in order to direct the back end of the car to the center of the parking space. In this particular case, we need to turn the steering wheel to the right. As soon as the back end of the vehicle is in the middle of the space, you have to turn the steering wheel to the left and finish parking. Let's see how it looks on the animation. In the process, do not forget that the front of your car will shift towards the neighboring car. Make sure you have enough space for such a maneuver. If your car is already halfway inside the parking space and there is little space left to the adjacent car, it would be safest to drive forward. There are many ways to correct this situation. In our case, the driver turns the steering wheel to the right and moves the car forward until the back end of the vehicle is in the middle of the parking space. Then he turns the steering wheel to the right as far as it goes and backs into the parking space. A question: why did the driver not drive correctly to the middle of the parking space but ended up on the edge? What did he do wrong? In this case, the driver did not turn the steering wheel at the right moment, but a little too late when he had already passed the line indicating parking space C. As a result, the car went to the far edge of the parking space. In fact, all cars have different steering angles. This angle depends on various factors, including the distance between the front and back axles. Thus, the driver always takes his car into consideration and looks for the best moment to turn the steering wheel. When you are practicing, analyze why you managed or failed to park on the first try. If you find yourself at the far edge of the parking space, try turning the steering wheel a little bit sooner. If you end up near the closer edge of the parking space, turn the steering wheel a little bit later. The alternative technique to parking in a bay. The second technique of parking in a bay will be more convenient if the parking spaces are not being marked. That is, you do not have the usual reference point of a marked line. In this case, you can orientate by the car parked nearby. Given the nature of this method of parking, the initial position may be somewhat different. You can be much closer to the parking space than in the case of the first method, which we have discussed earlier in this chapter. But at the same time, there should be enough space for maneuvering from the left side. The driver drives forward in a straight line until the front part of his car reaches the car located next to the vacant parking spot. After that, the driver turns the steering wheel to the left as far as it goes and continues to move. When the driver sees the headlight of the nearby car in the triangular window of his back door, he stops. This refers to the headlight closest to your parking space. Then the driver starts to move backwards in reverse gear and turns the steering wheel as far as it goes in the direction of the parking place. When his car is parallel with the cars parked nearby, the driver puts the steering wheel in a straight forward position and finishes parking the car. This method works well also when parking from the left side. The only difference is that this time, the headlight of the neighboring car should be seen in the middle of the back door window and not in the triangular window, as it was in the case of parking on the right side. The following discussion focuses on driving out of the parking space and on safety while parking. In the first part of our video course, we have already discussed driving out from a parking space. In order to drive out safely, the driver turns the steering wheel only after his shoulder passes the adjacent car. In the course of driving out, you have to control the lateral spacing to the neighboring car with the help of the side view mirror. If there's not much space in the front, do not forget to watch the front end of your car. Let's talk about safety in parking in a bay. As usual, any parking begins with a turn signal. As soon as you start to move and turn the steering wheel, your car's front end shifts immediately to the side. Hence, check that you are not creating obstacles to others with your maneuver. Make sure that the front corner of your car passes at a safe distance from the cars parked at the left side. When pointing the car into the space, constantly monitor the lateral distances to the right and to the left. Move at a minimum speed. If you have to maneuver inside the parking space, be sure to keep an eye on the front end of your car. When finishing the parking process, do not forget to check how much space you have behind you. Parking in a bay in forward motion. If the parking space is far from your car, it would be easier to park by driving into the space. However, this method of parking is not always the easiest. When driving out of a parking space, your field of vision can be very limited, and in parking areas with heavy traffic can be a serious problem. Despite this, many drivers prefer to drive into the space, because for them it is more convenient and easy to understand. When choosing a starting position for parking, you should bear in mind that when the car is in forward motion, it is less maneuverable. Hence, it makes sense to stay away from the parking space. At least 2 widths of your car must be between the car and the parking space. The farther you are from the parking space, the easier it is to park. Note that if you drive up to the parking space from the left, you have to go into the oncoming traffic lane. Otherwise, you won't be able to take the correct starting position and drive in. Parking in a bay in forward motion is done the same way from the left and the right sides. We will discuss parking with the left turn. We will be guided by the car parked in the next parking spot. The driver moves straight forward and looks at the left side mirror. When the mirror is in line with the headlight of the car in the adjacent space, the driver turns the steering wheel all the way to the left. This refers to the headlight which is closest to your parking space. The car turns in the direction of the parking space. Pay attention to how our car's back end is located in relation to the space. The difficult moment here is that if we do nothing and continue to move, we will fail to fit into the dimensions of the parking spot. To avoid this, the driver proceeds as follows. When the front corner of the car is inside the parking space, the driver turns the wheel to the right and he directs the corner of his car to be parallel with the car parked next to it. When the back end of the car ends up in the middle of the parking space, the driver turns the steering wheel to the left and gets the car parallel to the marking lines. This method requires some training because the driver has to be familiar with the outer dimensions of his car and to realize how the car is located in the parking place. In the next example, we will consider the common mistakes that drivers make when parking in a bay in forward motion. The car enters the parking space, but the driver does not feel the dimensions of his car and directs its front end not to the right, but to the center of the space. In other words, the angle at which he turns the steering wheel is too small. Furthermore, although the car is not yet parallel with the marking lines, the driver puts the steering wheel into a straight forward position and finishes the parking. As a result, the car is not standing in the parking space in a correct manner. A question: how can we fix this situation? First of all, we have to move backwards as we do not have any space left in front of us. In this case, we should take into consideration the fact that the back end of our car is not in the center of the parking space, but too close to the edge. In order to direct the back end of the car to the middle of the space, it would be necessary to turn the steering wheel all the way to the right, but we cannot do this because the car's front end will shift to the left where the space is limited by an adjacent car. Therefore, we have to act as follows. In order not to go even further to the left, we must first of all put the car parallel with the parking lines. To do this, we turn the steering wheel slightly to the right, and as soon as the car ends up parallel with the parking lines, we return the steering wheel to the straightforward position. Next, we move backwards as far as possible and put the car into the center of the parking space, driving it in. Next, we discuss the process of driving out from a parking space and talk about safety measures while driving in. We will consider driving out of the parking space to the left. When leaving the space, visibility is severely limited, so you should move slowly and signal the turn in advance. Typically, there is little space behind the parking spot, so it makes sense to immediately direct the car to the exit. To do this, turn the steering wheel about 90 degrees. In this case, you direct the front corner of your car to be parallel with the car parked next to it, and the danger of collision is minimal. You will be able to turn back and control the situation behind you as well. When the front corner of your car leaves the parking spot, turn the steering wheel as far as it goes and move backwards. Let's talk about safety while driving into a parking spot. We begin as usual with a turning signal, and before starting to move, we make sure that other road users are not approaching us from the front or the back. Next, we check that the front, right, and the back left corners of the car fit well into the dimensions of the parking space. While driving forward, we monitor constantly the front corner of the car and, if necessary, adjust the trajectory of our vehicle by means of the steering wheel. Let us stop and check that the car has not yet left the limits of the parking spot. Before leaving the parking space, we switch on the turn signal and make sure that there are no approaching vehicles or pedestrians in the back, neither on the right or on the left side. We turn the steering wheel 90 degrees, and just to be on the safe side, we check that the front end of our car passes the neighboring car at a safe distance. When driving in reverse, we have to look around constantly because of the limited visibility. Before we turn the steering wheel fully to the left, we make sure that the front end of our car is not going to touch the car parked next to us. Then again, we look around and make sure that there is enough space for the movement behind us. Before moving forward, we once again take a look around, and only then we continue to move. Thank you for your kind attention. Enjoy your parking experiences.